Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to this match video for Mud's mission taken from the website Royal Road. As always, I hope that you all enjoy this episode, and if you do, please consider supporting the channel. Also, all of these episodes will be available as a podcast on the various different podcast platforms. All the links will be down below. Chapter 69, Mud Mania. Free from the risk of being smote for the moment, Mud returned to the waiting room. The arena guide acted noticeably different this time, constantly looking back over his shoulder, a glint of fear in his eyes. Upon entering the ready room, one only other contestant remained aside from Mud, the feather-plumed warrior and his raptor. "Oh, so you were a beast all along, eh?" Although the man wore more clothing than Cobb, much of his chest was still exposed and his cross-shaped leather harness. His long brown hair was wild and tangled, and his legs were covered with leather breeches and a black jackboots. Rubbing his chin, he leaned over down towards Mud. "How about working for me? Life can be tough for a beast trying to live amongst humans, even if you're clever. It's a help with a half and have a human as act as your public face. Am I right, Pilum?" The raptor squawked merrily and stood up till her name was called. "I refuse. I already have attained a human." The warrior smoked and shrugged. "Oh well, worth a shot." Walking towards the guide, he spoke to the parting words. "If you can beat the prince's pet, I'll be seeing you in the finals. Later, Muddy." Ignoring the odd human, Mud slid towards the other exit of the waiting area, spotting an arena employee. Gollum composed a mental message. "Bring Cobb to me, I need to speak with him." After frantically looking around for a moment, the employee looked back to where Mud stood behind him. Noticing his form, he let out a small yelp and jumped back. After a moment, he seemed to regain his composure and took a deep breath. Cobb, that's one of the competitors, right?" "That is correct. Retrieve Cobb. But I'm not supposed to leave." The employee's eyes seemed to linger on Mud's twitching head for a moment before drifting down towards the visible meat hooks and knives sticking out of him to various locations. "Right, I'll get him right away." He then sprinted off in the direction of the stands. After a short delay, a huffing employee returned with the requested Cobb. Cobb looked somewhat annoyed, holding a half-eaten sausage in one hand and a wooden cup of alcohol in the other. "So what's this about a monster?" Cobb took a large bite out of his sausage and looked down at Mud. "I must take you out." Cobb nearly choked on his bite. With a few pounds on his chest, he finally managed to swallow it. "You what?" The arena employee mumbled under his breath, a dumbfounded look on his face. "Wasn't this thing hitting down that girl earlier? Our monster's just like this." Ignoring the misunderstanding, Mud continued, "I must take you out. However, I cannot leave the tournament. I will take you out after the tournament. Do you accept this arrangement?" Cobb seemed to think for a moment. "I don't know. I'm into demi-humans, but a magical beast is a bit, maybe we could get some coffee as friends? There are some things I was wondering about, actually." "That is agreeable. You are now my friend." "Just like that, huh? One-sidedly declaring friendship. You remind me of Bark." Shifting his gaze uncomfortably towards the arena employee, Cobb added with a stammer, "It's a shame he vanished, and I have absolutely no idea where he could have gone." Cobb stopped himself from saying anything else unnecessary with a large bite of sausage. "I'll collect you after the tournament." With that, Mud turned around and returned to the middle of the waiting area, head twitching erratically. "So, you knew, didn't you?" Thagi stood with his massive arms crossed, towering over the older female clerk. The senior clerk, Vodia, smiled innocently up to the much larger man's shadow. "Whatever do you mean, Leader Ghoul?" "Don't play games with me." Ghoul rubbed down his moustache in agitation. "You registered, Mud. You knew he was a construct, didn't you?" "Oh, that." Vidya shifted her gaze towards the fight below, where a raptor was currently circling around the flanker mage, while the man covered in leather and feathers performed elaborate motions with his outstretched arms, deflecting streaks of fire shots towards him with little apparent effort. "I might have known something like that. If I did, I would have been under no obligation to report it to you." Vidya quickly returned her gaze to Thagi to look him in the eyes. "Unless you think that I should be reporting the private information of every guild member to you. If that's the policy of the Galtheus branch, I'm sure my superiors would be interested to learn." Thagi held up a gauntleted hand, and the other holding his forehead. "Stop. Just stop. I get your point." Ghoul turned and punched a nearby stone wall, causing a blast of dust and leaving it splintered crack. "I'm so sick of this bureaucratic nonsense making my job harder. I don't need a complication at a time like this." Few diplomats turned back, startled at the commotion, but when they noticed who had made it, they quickly returned to facing the front, pretending to not have noticed. "I understand how you feel, but this construct would be a benefit to the association. The head priest said it himself. These sorts of life forms can become extremely powerful in a short span of time. Now that he's being targeted by the church, he'll be forced to rely on us even more heavily." The evil grin spread on the clerk's face, the eyes of a predator's flashing. "This is the perfect chance to bind it to us fully with bonds of gratitude and convince him of our usefulness. He will be a great tool against our enemies." Ghoul looked down at the clerk. Despite all the years together, the transformation she could make in an instant still unsettled him. He responded in a low voice. "I'm sure you're confident in your ability to keep a leash on anyone, but this isn't a man or a beast. You quoted the priest, so I'll do the same. What will you do if your project goes wrong? How will you take responsibility if the city is destroyed due to your plotting? If he turns against the association, we simply destroy him. I'm sure you can handle it, if that time ever comes." Thagi grimaced. Why was everyone around him so short-sighted and greedy, willing to put others at risk for their own gain? Perhaps it was merely a sapient nature, but what a hypocrite I am too, thought Thagi. Here I am running some tournament instead of clearing a dungeon, all because some vague implications of reprisal from the king. As much as I complain, aren't I part of the problem? With a short prayer to those soldiers forced to now guard the dungeon entrance, Ghoul returned to his seat. Eventually, Mud was called out by the guide one more time and directed to the arena. There, already waiting on his mark, was a familiar figure, the black-armored samurai Shin. As the guide and Mud made their way past the stands towards the ring, a voice yelled down towards the golem, "Hey, Executioner Mud, catch!" Leaning over the barrier was a loud boy. Clutched in his hands was a bundle of black fabric. As Mud directed his sight towards the boy, he tossed it directly at the golem. Catching it deftly, Mud examined the object. After unfolding, it appeared to be a child-sized black robe, but the bottom roughly torn into strips. "You lost your other one during the fight, so I ran out to get that during the last fight." A proud smile appeared on the boy's face as he jabbed a thumb towards his chest, boasting. While there was no longer any need to hide his identity, the robe was still functionally useful. Weapons and strikes could be hidden from the sight of the folds, and the hanging ends could be used for grappling. Swinging the cloak wide, Mud quickly fastened his cloak around his neck. The new cloak turned out to fit much better than the previous one, having been actually designed to be worn and not just a chunk of discarded black fabric. The boy looked overjoyed that his gift was accepted. "You got the spite, Executioner Mud. No one can sneak up on you with that mud shuffle." With that, the boy started doing a poor imitation of blind spot removal. Ignoring the child, Mud moved towards his designated spot. As he arrived on the X, the boy's voice yelled over once again, "Hey, I just got a new skill! Blind spot removal! Never heard of it." A curious adult voice soon followed. What's the description?" "Sorry, I don't have an information type ability. I got it pretty fast from doing like the executioner, though." Soon, several nearby spectators were doing poor imitations of blind spot removal. As word of an unknown, easy-to-learn skill spread, strangely wobbling heads quickly spread around the arena like an infection. Shin looked up in bafflement at the many hobbling and swaying heads in the stands. "What is this? Some sort of Galtheus tradition? Shake your head in the semi-finals?" One of the adults had started earliest rubbed his neck. "I don't like it much. It makes my neck sore, and some of the movements on record is telling me to do. I think it would cause my neck to snap." Another nearby man nodded in agreement. It's probably not good for humans. Mud's a monster after all. Maybe contortionists could use it." Similar conversations cropped up from amongst the humans. At the time, a new announcement appeared to Mud. Reward for contributing skill to Akashic record, 5 skill points. End of chapter. Chapter 70. Manes and Miasma. The origin of the concept of tears is unknown, but no reference to the concept can be found in the BAE documents. While the stratification of souls was understood, the terminology was not formalized until 100 years before Ancient Empire. Starting from the bottom, we have tiers 0 and 1, functionally identical. Both tiers represent the weakest form of the soul currently discovered. Attempts to train souls below level have all failed, sometimes catastrophically. Professor clears his throat. On death, all souls quickly shed their excess energy and return to the base form, regardless of the pre-death energy levels. The exact nature of this energy will be discussed in a future lecture. The purpose of splitting life forms between Tier 1 and 0 seems to be an arbitrary choice, simply placing life forms created by Demiurge into Tier 0 and life forms created by other Archons in Tier 1. Over the centuries, there have been many movements amongst academia to drop the Tier 0 concept entirely, but they have been held back by concerns that modern scholars may be missing a key knowledge lost to the fall of the ancient empire. Once the soul has absorbed a certain amount of soul energy, it becomes possible to ascend to a new level. For those who have strengthened their soul enough, the tier increases can often come with profound physical mutation. This event is rare in sapiens, who usually choose to focus their soul energy gains on filling out their soul shape. By contrast, magical beasts almost always focus their energy on strength. As a result, magical beasts will often mutate with every tier advancement. Lecture of the Tiers by Professor Sitio. Opposite me stands one known as Mud. Recently, the crowd had taken to calling him Executioner, the Pankal word for the professional killer, or so says my Lord Cain. The miasma of death clings to him, but it's still weak and thin. His path of death has started only recently. Among the spectators floating behind him, I see no humans, only beasts. Around the arena, a strange dance began amongst the population. Not some strange ritual, as I first believed, but a new skill discovered. The civilian's year of fools. This technique would be useless to one of our kind. It requires an inhuman anatomy to perform correctly, or at least a suitable, rare skill. I won't bother to learn it. Fighters, are you ready? I glanced through the slit of my mask at the judge. He seems uncomfortable near Mud. The people of the Pankal are uncomfortable with intelligent non-sapiens. Not a surprise, as they are rare in this land. While the judge looks strong and well-trained, there is little death around him. He is weak. I can. The judge seems slightly put off by my answer. Perhaps my grasp on Pankal tongue is still lacking. Even with the aid of the Akashic records, learning has been difficult. Opposite, the construct again uses his mind to magic to speak to the judge. A spirit of a mentalist whisper into my ear the contest as his message. I am ready. I rest my arm on my sword hilt, hanging from my left hilt, and await the signal. The judge steps back and sharply lifts his arm. Begin. I unsheath my sword and strike forward in one motion, the same test I gave him the day before in the pit of Abraxas. Will he respond the same way? A burst of his mind magic flows towards me, but it's effortlessly pushed aside by my loyalty. Mental tricks will not work on me for so long as I am the strength of my lord. My blade streaks down towards the golem's neck. The sword on the back leaps from the sheath and blocks the blade with a surprising swiftness, following a burst of mana flowing from the mud. It's suspected that the executioner was using mind magic to move his weapon on the previous fight against the mage Susie, but that is not the case. Not nearly enough mana is used when using the movements and the strength I see. My blow was redirected by a hanging block, but a skilled swordsman would not be unbalanced by such unexpected defense. I pushed the base of my sword handle with my left hand while pulling the top of the blade handle with my right, swiftly swiveling the tip of the blade around to deflect the stab from Mud's sword. As our swords make contact, the floating blade pushes back. If I move my sword, I will be cut. With our weapons locked, Mud attacks my opposite side with the blades hidden below his cloak. How nostalgic to see chain weapons so far from my homeland. Such flimsy things are no threat to me, however. I call upon the aid of a spirit. Beside me, my grandfather swings down his blade. His sword resembles the one I hold in my hands, for indeed it is the same blade, a reflection from another time. With a sweeping motion, the phenomena blade, the construct attacks are deflected. His head swivels to look for which will block the attack. You will not find it, no matter how you look. The spirit of my lost friend holds his floating sword in place with the tekpai, locking it between the tines. Escaping the grip would be difficult in any case, but the phantom weapons being unseen by the foe complicates matters greatly. Now, the executioner whose weapons are locked away while mine are free. Putting the tip of my blade high, I swing down my blade in a vertical strike. My right hand aims to blow, and near the end of the downward arc, I pull back sharply with my left hand. The tip of the blade whistles through the air as death falls towards mud. A perfect strike. A blast of magic strikes the blade from below, and it's useless. My blade is loyal to me, just as I am loyal to my lord. Only I may control it. The blade cuts through the black cloak and strikes into the muddy flesh, squarely in the middle of the beast's head, resisting much greater than expected. While mud appears to be made of wet dirt, as his name implies, it now feels as though I'm cutting through a boulder. Regardless, my blade sinks deeper. After sinking a finger's length into the beast's flesh, the resistance increases greatly. The familiar feel of striking metal. A strong blow will need to defeat this opponent. As I try to pull the blade out, I am surprised to find that the wound is already closed over, brown flesh flowing out around the blade and rejoining. Instead of freeing my blade, I instead lift mud off the ground. More hidden weapons appear from below the beast, hooks and blades. I lift my leg, knee nearly reaching my own chest. A forward thrust kick strikes mud, the heel of my sandal striking the topmost eye. The force of the strike slides him off my blade and sends him far backward. As he flies backward, his attacks are now out of range of my strike. Some distance away, he stops suddenly in the air after releasing a burst of mana. He hovers in place for a moment, as though such concepts of momentum and gravity do not apply to him. The spirit of my grandmother whispers into my ear. He's preparing another spell to dive towards me, just as he had done against Susie. I don't think he realized that I can read his magic easily. He likely thinks his charge will take me by surprise, a chance to destroy him with his own power then. Turning my mind inward, I focus on the ideal of separation. Subtly, the concept of splitting in half fills my blade. I lower the tip of my blade at my right side, low to the floor. One inexperienced in fighting swordsman might think that this was a defenseless stance. This should cause him to attack recklessly. As hoped, the beast rocks towards me, striking itself with the back of the spell to propel itself. A dangerous method of movement, although not uncommon. As he draws near, he hides his many wooden weapons behind himself. To his side, his sword still struggles against the binds of my friend. I remain motionless. When he enters my range, I explode into motion, stepping forward with my right leg, rotating my hips to the left and pushing my right shoulder forward. Aim my blade towards the upper left of my right arm, pulling sharply back at the perfect moment with my left hand. I feel little resistance as my blade slides through the flesh, and my blade passes entirely through his body, exiting the opposite side, so swift is my attack that the beast had no time to recombine the wounds behind my blade's path. The ideal of separation pushes the halves apart, removing any lingering possibility of the beast reforming. His lower body and some of his weapons fly past my left side, and his upper body flies over my right shoulder. A moment later, both halves land behind me with a wet thump. I turn around. It seems my strike did not get him immediately. His body is twitching wildly now, nearly vibrating. The sword behind me falls to the ground with a heavy impact, activating an ability used to defeat the last opponent. Useless. It cannot escape the spectral bonds. I take a step towards the fallen form of the beast. It crawls now towards its motionless lower half, which has lost all cohesion and collapsed into a pile of wet dirt. Mud has not given up. The judge has not stopped the fight. Does the judge think that Mud can still fight, or does he merely enjoy watching the beast suffer? Such determination on the part of my opponent is inspiring, but I must win for the sake of my lord. I raise my blade to finish off my opponent, but hesitate as a disturbing sensation in my unique skill fills me with dread. Some things are more important than simply winning a duel. Even seconds can matter. Lowering my blade, I turn towards the VIP booth and yell at the gathered officials, "Death! Soldiers, death!" Already, the association leader has stood and is moving towards the arena ground. "Leader Ghoul, I sense death in the dungeon. Many death. Human." "Stop the fight. This tournament is postponed until further notice." The roaring voice of an enraged ghoul cuts through the stadium. End of chapter. Chapter 71. Mega Microchaetus. Mud slowly pulled itself towards the lower half of its body, now a heap of unmoving dirt. Several chains could be seen sticking out of the lump, having been sliced off by a powerful blow. 3 health. That was how close Mud had come to death. Supposedly, there were procedures in place, and an actual death would be prevented. Still, the pain of failure was like an ice pick to the golem's mind. Mud was supposed to avoid damage, yet here it was, nearly dead. The master's property being split in half was completely unacceptable, even if it was Mud's own body. Even movement felt slower, each unit forward of labor of will. Behind Mud, the VIP viewing platform, there was a hectic movement, and a woman in purple robe flew off riding on a snake of lightning. Thuggy Ghoul yelled a pause on postponement of the tournament, then scrambled up the arena stands like a monkey, eventually leaping over the edge of the structure and out of sight. The priest had tried to kill Mud looked over at the golem's helpless form for a moment. Mud felt a momentary chill of fear. It seemed that the priest decided against taking advantage of the moment of vulnerability and instead vanished in a burst of rainbow light. "It seems we will finish this another day. You are saved by fortune this time." Turning, Shen left the ring and ran from the tunnel towards the exit. This time, the other powerful individual began likewise making the way towards the exit. Mud finally arrived at his lower body and focused on reabsorbing his lost mass. Leader Ghoul was a blur as he ran through the wide streets of Coltheus. At least the arena enclosed and to the dungeon, he thought, but that would do nothing to help those who were already dead, or their families. Rounding the corner, the dungeon entrance finally came into sight. It was chaos. The defense lines were broken, soldiers scattered and fighting as disordered clumps amongst the wave of green and pale yellow undulating shapes. The reason for the break was immediately obvious. The Tier 5 worm of the tower. A large beast, it could only barely fit through the upper tunnels. Its body stretched to nearly 20 units. Currently, it wrapped itself around the bank of building, making a full circle. Its entire body was sickly green-yellow. On its lower half it grew a number of stubby black legs, and around the head grew a ring of tentacles ending in hooked claws. The tentacles around its head almost resembled a halo, or the flowing mane of a lion, combined with a serpentine body. The beast was like a twisted imitation of Yaldabaoth. Ghoul scowled. Even from a distance, the stench of human death flowed from the maw of the beast. In one of the outstretched tentacles, it clutched the corpse of a soldier. A dog-like demi-human. By now, the priest and the captain had caught up to him, the former appearing in a flash of rainbow light and the latter riding on her spell. "You two focus on aiding and containing the breach. I'll kill the big one." They leapt into action without needing any further instructions. In matters of the dungeon, Ghoul was the authority. Despite their earlier disagreement, the head priest, a man named Asitium, was not one to allow his personal feelings to get in the way of doing his duty. Having finished his current meal, the worm of the tower moved the demi-human towards its mouth. Before the course could be swallowed, however, the hooked end of the tentacle holding the body was severed, sending it crashing to the stone roads below. A shriek of rage erupted from the worm's beak-like mouth. A trickle of blood flowed from Ghoul's ear as a concussive wave rolled over him, but he ignored it and tore off another tentacle. Finally, the worm retaliated in earnest, dozens of hooked tentacles swiping towards Thuggy's position. Ghoul threw the torn-off tentacle he was holding directly upward, the force of the throw pushing himself downward, just in time to dodge the swipe. So swift was the throw that the impressive booming noise was produced, staggering the beast. Thuggy deftly grabbed the passing tentacle and scampered up its length. Soon he arrived at the beast's head. The worm of the tower did not stay still during this assault. Its body stumbled and swayed, striking at the nearby buildings. Fortunately, the buildings in the area immediately surrounding the dungeon were built with suitable durability to survive strikes this powerful. Less fortunate were the few soldiers who happened to be nearby. They were crushed instantly, unable to resist the sheer size and speed of the beast's falling. This needed to end as soon as possible, but killing such a massive beast was no trivial task, even for one as powerful as the leader ghoul. While the beast's hide was strong and resistant to damage, it was of little concern to Ghoul. Even the thick chitin, the worm of the tower, was like a wet paper against his might. The greater problem was getting enough leverage for a good strike, the striking deeply enough into the body for a fatal blow. While the pole arm still strapped to the leader's back was long in terms of human-sized opponents, against a monster this size it was little better than his hands. No. To get the job done swiftly, he would simply need to use more disgusting method. Placing his hands on the beak of the beast, he tore the mouth open. Inside the head was a white liquid flowed outwards, the characteristic acid of the dungeon's inhabitants. Of course, being the one in charge of the dungeon, he had taken precautions. The acid would not hinder him, yet he was still stung when it got into his eyes and mouth, and the smell was horrible. It was times like this that he wished that he could turn off his unique skill. Grimacing, Ghoul climbed into the mouth of the beast and began ripping apart the roof of its mouth with his gauntleted hands. Handful by handful, he threw chunks of greenish meat to the side. Thuggy could see the wound slowly closing even as he tore, so tenacious was the worm's tower healing ability. But the healing could not outpace the leader's assault. The wild thrashing could not dislodge him from his perch inside the mouth of the beast. After several minutes of tunneling through the head of the monster, Ghoul finally reached his destination. Breaking through the last bits of jaw, he broke into the chamber of much softer material, the worm of the tower's brain. A curious aspect of the monster's ascendancy in this dungeon was the development of this organ. In the lower tiers, this beast had no brain, and instead seemed to act only on instinct. Destroying the head still cowed them, but for other reasons. At Tier 3, they began to develop an actual brain of sorts, and could even begin to learn. As such, it was vital for Ghoul to clear out the lowest level of the dungeon regularly, to prevent them from becoming too intelligent. This brain made the beasts much more dangerous if left alone for extended periods of time. In this case, however, the organ would be the monster's downfall. Spreading his arms wide, Ghoul grabbed the brain's flesh as though giving it a hug. His arms tore through the soft meat with little resistance, causing fresh and set up spasms to sharp movements to the worm. After tearing the brain apart for a few more times, it finally stopped moving, and Ghoul felt his opponent tumble and strike the ground heavily. Experience gained 0. Retracing his path, Ghoul tore through the regrown flesh and exited back out the mouth of the beast. Once outside, he examined the situation. Priest Asitium and guard Captain Algar had worked quickly while he was occupied. All of the escaped beasts had been killed, the majority scorched black by Algar's lightning. A new front had been established to hold back the tide of newly appearing monsters. One side down, Asitium cared for the injured soldiers. It seemed the worst was over. At this time, the slower arrivals from the arena finally appeared. The prince and his group, the tamer riding his raptor, and even the construct and Sithlar's niece. You lot, go and wait by the dungeon entrance. We'll be doing a sweep in a moment. Most of them appeared disturbed by the carnage on the battlefield. Even now, the corpses of several soldiers lay strewn across the grass. One girl, a rookie delver named Novus, even vomited. None of the others commented. Everyone proceeded towards the dungeon entrance as instructed, with no exception from the prince. Instead, he surveyed the field with troubled expression. How could this happen? I thought this town had a perfect record. How could this happen? At the comment, Ghoul was overcome with rage. It's because you happened. This is your doing, your highness. Stepping forward rapidly, Leader Ghoul grabbed Kane by the shirt and pulled his face close to his own. These men died because your father wanted you to look good. Take a look around you. Ghoul waved his arm towards the surroundings. By far the most deaths were the denizens of the dungeon, but that isn't what stood out. Between the carnage of green, corpses lay of men and women, burned by acid, torn apart by the claws of mandibles, and crushed by the worm of the tower. A subtle indentation appeared in Ghoul's neck, and he held the prince. The pressure of the unseen blade on the carotid artery. Ghoul released the prince, and the pressure of the blade disappeared. Prince Kane stumbled slightly as he was released from the grip. Looking across the battlefield, his eyes lingered on the pillboxes constructed on the demand of his father. Of course, if the wave was even worse, if even the local defenders died, wouldn't that mean the stories of the prince's heroics even greater? If the city was pushed to the brink of disaster, wouldn't he be all more powerful for saving it? The common people would never know the truth of what happened here, but it was doubtful that even the doubles and soldiers gathered here now truly understood. To them, this was simply an unusually bad wave, and the legend would be passed down through generations of the day that the hero prince saved the city. End of chapter. Chapter 72. March to the Moor. Land of riches unspoiled, the verdant soil stretching far into the horizon, twisting spires of shining crystal and seas of rubies. Such wonders to found the lands unconquered by the children of gods. In my youth I travelled the land resplendent, known to those in this land as the uncivilized continent. Many and more were my troubles, yet still I carried on. Buoyed as I was by the promise of the undiscovered beyond each horizon, seldom I was disappointed. Uncontained by the machinations and the hubris of mankind, the true vision of nature shone forth in all its radiance. Within the fields, thick and vibrant grass frolicked the children of Abraxas, at harmony with themselves. Ideology and dogma held no sway in these lands, strength being the only truth and only justice. Such a savage simplicity may seem shocking to those back home, yet in this realm there is no need for war, no purpose for lies or intrigue. Should your disagreement appear, the matter will soon be settled by death. In my old age, I know my time will be short. Despite my strength and my soul, I have fostered over a lifetime of turmoil. The grim spectre of death can but only be delayed. I believe I shall return to this great land of my youth soon. I have no plans to return. This will be my last you hear from me. Thank you. Letter to Sithla discovered in his home, signed the Great Warrior Vegas. After standing in thought for a moment after the departure of Leader Ghoul, Prince Kane finally made his way towards the dungeon entrance. Nearby, his colleagues followed closely. A group proceeded in silence for some time. Magnus, do you think my father predicted this outcome? Prince Kane understood the ruthless nature of his father. For the king, any action that benefited the nation at large was justified. The carnage around him, however, gave him a pause. While it didn't seem outside of the realm of possibility that the king might allow some city guardsmen to die for the purpose of propaganda, this seemed excessive, sloppy even. It was already widely speculated amongst the population that the dungeon was closed by the order of the royal family, due to how unusual of a choice it was and the fact that the first prince was arriving. The scale of the damage here was too great to be forgotten, and even the most ignorant civilian would be able to put two and two together. Magnus smacked his lips and scrunched up his face in thought, a rarity for the great magician to need to think before answering, thought Kane. No, something's wrong. This is not how it's supposed to happen. Magnus's eyes began to flicker rapidly in different directions as he paused in his speech. Kane recognized this, the mnemonic device the great magician used when formulating a theory. He wasn't sure of the exact details, but it seemed to involve creating some sort of image using his magic to help organize his thoughts. After a while, Magnus spoke again. There are methods to accelerate the germination of a dungeon, cause them to produce much more nasties than usual, cause a bigger than usual wave would make your legend all the greater, but if it were to weigh the relative value of the legacy against the economic significance of the city of Carthaeus, the risk and the rumors, the indistinct voice of Sibylla floated into the prince's ears, her form unseen. Could this be a conspiracy by a foreign nation? Perhaps they took advantage of us arriving here, looking to both destroy Carthaeus and lay blame on the crown prince. 2 useful goals accomplished with 1 act of espionage. But, one nation, we have peaceful relations with all our neighbors. Prince Cain shook his head. While there were still many state secrets to which he was still kept in the dark, he was still being groomed to be the next king. He would definitely be informed of something as like a cold war in a foreign nation. Could this instead be a plot of a demon, or just some unfortunately timed natural phenomenon? Or even the plotting of some lone madman, Magnus added. Abyss, it could even just be another of the great enchanter's experiments gone wrong. He was always rather careless with exercising his power. In my homeland, spoke up Shin in an uncertain tone, there was a, scholar, I think you say. She was a great expert on magic and moving portals. She had an idea of a new kind. City was destroyed. Shin looked around the battlefield and appeared unmoved by the death. Country thought it was a plot of a neighbor. Great war started. Many deaths. At the end, we found out it was just a scholar. Her mistake alone. Let's not jump to conclusions for now. I believe there is something else going on here, but we need more evidence to work with. We can't let ourselves arrive at the wrong conclusion. And, as painful as it is to consider, we can't ignore the possibility it was all part of the king's plan. The group proceeded in silence as the rest of the way to the dungeon entrance. Our fight being cut short was very convenient, thought Mud. The golem was certain that it had lost that fight, having been split in half and nearly dying from Shin's attack. The fight had been rather one-sided, Mud and Ego both having their attacks blocked by some unseen force. Now, at least they would have time to form a strategy. Currently, Mud stood behind the row of soldiers at the back of the waves of caterpillars. Floating above, the cloaked in arcs of electricity, a female human in purple robe was picking off the higher-tier magical beasts with precisely aimed bolts of electricity. All right, our goal is to kill every living creature inside this dungeon. Keep your own safety as your top priority. Do not descend into the depths beyond what you are able to handle. We'll be spreading out to cover more ground, so form groups. 3 individuals soon arrived at Mud's side. As expected, Novus and Jabrax were in the first 2. Less expected was Cobb. Why are you here? Asked Mud. What? Cobb placed his hands on his chest and affected offended. Didn't you say I'm your friend now? Obviously we should work together. Looking off to the side, he fixed his slightly. Besides, I felt kind of bad for your team just being rookies. I've been delving for a while, so I can help you out. What he means, commented Jabrax dryly, is that nobody else will let him join their group. Nonsense! I could join any team I want. Cobb's eyes drifted slowly over to the surrounding crowd of delvers. Mud noticed that Cobb's drinking buddies from the association were grouped up with the bear, Ursula, and the strange jellyfish-like magical beast from the tournament. At some point, a runner had retrieved those few who were still hanging around the association building instead of watching the tournament. Sure you could. Jabrax squinted at the uncomfortably squirming Cobb. Excuse me, Nova spoke up cautiously. What kind of formation are we going to be using? Like, what sort of tactics should we use? Before Mud could reply, Ghoul called out over the crowd, which was now divided into small groups. All right, all of you with area attacks can help clear out the hallways without wasting too much resources. Come forward. Following the order, Mud slid forward to the front, along with a few mages that Mud didn't recognize, as well as a fire mage user from the association. Thagi eyed Jabrax for a moment as she stood back waiting for the crowd, but decided not to call out to her. Instead, he turned towards the surrounding group. All right, try to kill as many as you can, but be absolutely certain no injuries to allies, and don't waste too much mana or spirit. Got that? During the part about injuring allies, the leader's gaze was fixed on the fire mana user, who avoided his gaze. A chorus of agreements came from the gathered mages. A moment later, the assault began. Waves of fire, fogs of poison, and arcs of lightning split through the green mass. From mud, a barely visible yellow mist spread outwards, household magic tainted with the concept of home free of pests. Since they were now inside the domain of the city of Galtheus, instead of the domain of this dungeon, the kill pest spell was highly effective. The giant caterpillar struck by the magic quickly began spasming and dying. Corpse worms enveloped flailed wildly, becoming ineffective in combat. Although they were not killed outright, other larger beasts showed no apparent effect, but ignored the mist entirely. An overwhelming flood of experience notifications appeared before mud. A vast majority showed 0 experience, but occasionally the golem would gain as few as 1 or as much as a dozen experience, partial credit from killing higher-tiered beasts. Although it had no visible effect, the mist at least counted as enough to give him some small credit. Before long, the group was making steady progress forward, marching over thick carpet of beast corpses. Those few that survived the onslaught of the area attacks were quickly picked off by precision strikes from the more powerful fighters present. The progress was swift, and the group soon arrived at the stairwell down into the dungeon. The stone spiral staircase was in ruins, crushed into debris. Considering the size of the worm of the tower corpse had made it outside, it must have needed to destroy the stairs in order to reach the surface. Well, I could just jump. Do any of your magic types have a solution for this? Thagi turned towards the surrounding adventurers. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.